This is Amalia Denoon, and I'm so happy to have with me today Shanon Baker. He's a captain, and we're going to go ahead and get him to introduce himself. But I wanted to share a little bit about how we met. I was flying on an airline. Next to me was seated the second leg first officer. His name is Wes. And I learned so much about it. And because of my work in STEM, I wanted to share it with my audience. And I asked Wes to be a part of the podcast, and he said, I'm very private, but I know someone who has a lot more information, training, and skill than I do. And that person was Shanon Baker. So today we have Shanon Baker here. Shanon, go ahead. And if you don't mind, just tell me about yourself. How can people get in touch with you? Because I want to ensure that anybody who has follow-up questions can reach out. Please go ahead.
Absolutely. So thanks for having me. I'm Shanon Baker. I am a captain and what's called an LCP, a line check pilot for United Airlines. And I've been at United Airlines for 5 years. I was a corporate pilot before that for 19 years. So I've been in aviation for quite some time. And so first aviation job was in 2000, and then I've been flying. But I got my private pilot's license in high school, actually, when I was a senior in high school in 1994.
Wow.
So it has been some I've been flying for nearly 30 years, and I'm just 46.
30 years. Wow.
I do pilot mentoring, and I know a lot about the industry. The best way to I have a podcast actually, and the best way to get me is through that podcast email. And so the email is aluminumtubepodcast@gmail.com. So aluminumtubepodcast@gmail.com, or you can just go to altubepodcast.com. And then you can see my podcast there, but that's the place that you could also contact me. So there's a contact tab. Just click on the contact tab if you have any questions. I mean, certainly welcome to listen to my podcast, but I'm not plugging that in any way. So it is about aviation history. So it may be something that ignites a spark. So just
spark is being a pilot, something you always wanted to do.
So I get this question a lot, and I know that a lot of people are sort of at a crossroads when they are in school, or I mean, my daughter is 14, and she's like, what am I going to do? What am I interested in? I luckily never really had that conflict, because I don't remember a time when I didn't want to be a pilot. And I'm the only pilot in my family. So it wasn't like my dad did it. It was none of that. My dad was a union carpenter and owned a construction company at some point. And so I was never exposed to aviation in a meaningful way. And I took that initiative and did it myself. And so, yeah, I just grew up. I always said I wanted to be a pilot from the time I can remember. And it was something that I just always wanted to do. And it's interesting that, I made it happen. So.
That's interesting that you said that, because Wes said that pilots are born. And he said one of the ways to tell if a child is going to be a pilot or interested in it is if they're fascinated with the sky. Did you have that kind of experience yourself?
Absolutely. I was exposed. I think I went on a few cross-country flights. I know my grandparents lived in California at the time, and I went on a few cross-country flights, and then that was it. I was like, okay, this is it. So, and I remember, I think, being like a 4 or 5-year-old, and at the time you could actually go up to the cockpit and you could get into the flight deck during flight, and the pilots would talk to you. And that was back before the unfortunate events in 2000, 9/11, but that really did inspire me. And I think that I tried to do that with my passengers. I had some children, actually a bunch of children in the cockpit yesterday. And so yeah, pilots are born. I don't know how else to say it. I mean, if you look up at the sky and you see an airplane and you say, that's fascinating, I want to do that, you probably do want to do it. That is probably something that is interesting to you. So and that's where I always start with the encouragement there. I'm sorry, I'm moving my camera around, but I always start with that, because yeah, if that's something that you're interested in, for sure,
Right.
That may be something that you need to explore.
Yeah. So that will lead me to my next question. Um, what is the difference between an Airbus captain and a line check pilot, and what is the responsibilities of both?
Okay, so let me back up just a minute and talk about the roles in
Okay.
which that we operate as flight crew members. So
Okay.
the first role that we operate in is, of course, after education, and we'll get there.
Yeah.
We'll get there. But as an airline pilot, the roles that I operate in are quite significant. They're very designated and very straightforward. So I
Mhm.
operate as the very first job that you would get with an airline is as a first officer, which
Okay.
means you are sitting in the right seat. Something that people misunderstand about first officer is that a first officer is not a co-pilot. I know that term gets pushed around. Co-pilot is different than first officer. First officer has a distinct duty, and they have distinct duties from the captain. So there is a very distinct line between, they're not just there to assist it's not like an assistant pilot. It's not a random assistant way. Each seat has a specific role.
Okay.
So in an airline, we don't use the term co-pilot. That is not a term that we really use in any aspect of aviation anymore. So you would start as a first officer,
Mhm.
then based on the seniority and your longevity with the company, you would be offered, not necessarily required, but offered the opportunity to then be a captain. So a first officer is a pilot who runs checklists, flies the airplane, like I said, has a very distinct duty and a very distinct position, and not necessarily lesser than the captain. So that duty is very distinct. And their job is to be technically skilled, be
Mm.
able to operate the airplane, be able to fly the airplane in the case that the captain is incapacitated or there is another problem that the captain has to deal with. So we call that second in command, and then the captain would be pilot in command. So the captain then again has very distinct duties. His duties are more broad and larger in that he is there to ensure the safety of the flight, whereas the first officer is a very technical role. They are
Right.
there to operate the aircraft, ensure that all the policies and procedures get upheld, and to then support the large operation of the safety of the aircraft. So the captain is there to ensure the safety of the aircraft, and they also have a distinct role. That role is more of a, I would say, a customer service role. We're
Oh, wow.
there to make sure that everything stays on time, that that if there are conflicts, that they get resolved, and ultimately the captain is the ultimate authority to what happens on the aircraft,
Wow.
including what happens in the back of the aircraft.
Okay.
So we're thinking like the right seat, which is the first officer, is system with a small s. So this is how we operate the airplane in a technical way. The left seat is system with a big S. This is big picture.
Wow.
Um, and so that's how we define the roles in an airline environment. An LCP, a line check pilot, is a pilot who then conducts training for new first officers and also new captains,
Mhm.
and checks those pilots. So every now and then they have to go to recurrent training
Mhm.
between 6 and 9 months every year, and every 6 to 9 months on a rolling calendar. And then they have to have what's called a line check every 24 months, and they
Mhm.
also have to be trained. So I conduct initial training on first officers. I conduct initial training on new captains. That would be a first officer that's moving from the
Oh,
first officer role to the captain role.
yeah.
And then I also conduct line checks, which is checking that the captain is doing the job of a captain. So once they've been on the line for initially 6 months, and then they get checked every 24 months after that, in
Uh,
addition to their 9 month training.
okay, got it. So I had a question about line check. I felt like from the conversation with Wes, he said that the line check actually checks in the air, or is that something done from the ground?
So we check all phases of flight, but we start with the flight planning phase. But
Okay.
the meat of the check is actually in the air, and it's conducted on a full passenger leg,
Wow.
just as we conduct training even on new pilots. So I finished a new pilot last night. He came to United Airlines from a regional carrier called PSA. He
Okay.
was a very capable pilot, but we conducted training on live flights
Wow.
for the entire breadth of his training. So yeah, so that happens live, and as a passenger, you may not know that it's happening, but we are conducting training and line checking on regularly scheduled flights.
So are you in a separate airplane or are you on the plane that we're on?
So we are live on the airplane that you are on.
You got
So
it.
as a line check, if I'm checking a crew, I'm sitting in the flight deck in the center seat. So there's a
Okay.
seat that sits behind.
Yeah.
There's two
Oh,
left and right, and then there's a seat that sits in the center. So this is where I would sit
oh, wow.
in an observation seat
Oh,
to
nice.
check the crew. Yes.
Oh, that's interesting. When I'm divorced now, but when I got married, my dad explained sitting in a seat like that, and we didn't know the seat existed. And so my dad sat in a line check seat to be here in time for my wedding because it was snowing and his plane got canceled. And he's like, I have to be there for the wedding. So after
Oh
my
wow,
show, he would love to know that he sat in
amazing.
seats. So is it easy to be a pilot? Because that I think was one of the most asked
Is it
questions.
easy? It's like most careers, it's
Yeah.
multifaceted.
Okay.
So there are portions that are easy and there are
Yeah.
portions that are challenging. It certainly depends on the person.
Right.
The person, so as far as I get this question a lot is there a lot of math?
Yeah.
There is not. There is
Okay.
not. There's not a lot of math, but it is very technical. So we're not up there doing math, but it is a very technical
Yeah.
and so not only decision making and thinking ahead of the airplane, but also like technically skilled in flying and operating the aircraft in real time. So very it takes practice. Is it going back to the original question? Is it easy? I would say it depends on who you are. I've had students. So I started my career as a flight instructor, just
Right.
teaching in small airplanes, and I've had students that made it appear very easy, that
Right.
really did just kind of grab it and it was easy for them. And I have had students in the past that it does not come easy.
Okay.
So like most fields, again, it depends on the I don't want to say like the innate talent, but there is a little bit of an innate talent. It depends on a lot of factors. It depends on um, whether you have that innate ability, and it also depends on how dedicated you are.
Right.
Because if you're not very dedicated, it can be a struggle.
Yeah. I remember Wes, sorry to keep bringing up Wes, but he was saying it's a
Oh,
technical
that's
skill.
okay.
So if you put the commitment into it, it's something that can be acquired. He said almost anybody can fly. You just have to be dedicated to learning the technicalities of what it takes to fly. Would you agree?
I think I do. I think it's important to say almost anyone can fly. There- because
Yeah.
there's a medical that you have to pass.
Okay.
So that can be an obstacle.
Got it.
Um, that's something that if you would want to be a pilot, the very first thing to do is, can I pass the medical? You're going to have to spend $150 to go to a specific FAA doctor
Mhm.
and say, here's my medical history. Can I be a pilot?
Got it.
So when Wes says almost anyone can be a pilot, we have to acknowledge that there is a requirement to be physically able to be a pilot.
Is
So
that is that for an airline or just in general? Like if I wanted to learn to fly recreationally, do I still have to be able to pass the medical?
you do, but the bar is going to be lower.
Got it.
So Right. Once you've sort of met that requirement, once you're physically able to fly an aircraft, and I feel that it's occupational necessity,
Yeah.
right? Once you've met that occupational necessity, most people do not have a struggle with
Wow.
being a pilot. Most people can study and grasp it, and they can get good at it.
Absolutely.
So so it is a field that is open to all people,
Okay.
because people are like, oh well, does my an a question another question I feel is, oh, my vision isn't 2020. I mean, you can see I'm wearing glasses. My vision isn't 2020 either. So that may be something that's held over from the past or from military, but that is not a requirement to be a pilot.
It's not a requirement.
No, no, it is not. No, definitely not.
Um, I have a question. I want to circle back a little bit. You said that you started flying in high school.
I
So
did.
what sort of options are there for a high schooler who may have the aspiration of becoming a pilot?
So unfortunately, there is a financial aspect to this. There is a financial burden. However, there are options for that. There are some scholarships, there are loans that can be gotten to go to school. As far as flying in high school, that's most almost certainly going to be a sort of pay out of pocket
Okay.
situation. But you can start flying as young as you would like, and you can start logging that time, provided you're flying with an instructor. Once you hit the age of 16, you can fly by yourself,
Oh,
but
wow.
not carrying any passengers.
Okay.
And then once you've hit the age of 17, you are then eligible to get a private pilot's license,
Wow.
which means that you're going to have private pilot privileges. You can carry passengers.
Nice.
You can fly your friends to and from the beach, which is what I did as a senior in high school. I grew up in southern Pennsylvania, so I said, oh, let's go to the Maryland beaches. So
Nice.
so quite fun. But yes, but again, there is that a financial aspect there. Once you're eligible for student loans, once you've graduated high school and you're eligible for student loans, then there are loans available.
Okay, so for because the target demographic is the underrepresented community, that could
Yes,
prove a challenge. What are your thoughts on the
absolutely.
Civil Air Patrol? Because I'm somewhat familiar with that. Is that a viable option to help with the cost aspect?
Absolutely, it is. Civil Air Patrol is a fantastic option,
Mhm.
because what it allows all levels of exposure
Yeah.
to aviation, from just starting to getting out there and actually conducting Civil Air Patrol missions. So
Mm.
every aspect between that is available. And I am not that familiar with Civil Air Patrol.
Okay.
But I think they do some level of subsidies, some level of like discounted flights for beginners and things like that. So I think that's a very viable option. I think it's a good option for a lot of people.
Okay. Thanks. Let me see. I have a few questions here. We're almost out of time, so I want to honor your time. Um,
I'm a little long-winded, so I'm sorry about that.
Absolutely not. So much great information coming out of it, out of the conversation. One of the things I heard is that from Wes is that sometimes if uh, being a pilot is not a career you can transition out of. What are the top three skills you think a pilot takes with them if they transition into another career?
So the very first skill is leadership.
Okay.
So for certain, there are so many aspects of leadership that can transition from being a pilot to be in any career. As a captain, I lead an entire airplane and a crew. So I'm responsible for, in my current role, a crew of 5. In previous roles, a crew of up to 20.
Wow.
So 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 leadership is going to transfer out 100% for sure.
Mhm.
Then technical flexibility and the ability to operate um, confidently within the confines of other machinery. So I know that operate heavy machinery with a little bit of training, and I have the confidence to do that. And you said 3 skills. You know, the third skill would just be general professionalism. I think professionalism may be an underrated skill.
Right.
Maybe it is. But professionalism is a very important skill that bridges all careers.
Wow.
Being a pilot certainly teaches you professionalism.
Right.
That is something. You wear a uniform, you represent, you are taught to be, you're instructed to be a professional. You are instructed to follow the rules because this is how safety happens. We follow the rules. When you follow the rules, safety happens. And so all of those things lead to very solid base in professionalism.
Wow.
So certainly that's what I would say.
Um, one of the most important questions I forgot to ask was, how long is the training and how many hours do you have to log?
So very much like a doctor, the training is going to start slow, and
Okay.
then you will slowly transition up and up and up and up. So
Mhm.
the training initially is going to be 9 months to a year,
Wow.
and you would be required to have at least 250 hours during that training period.
How
During
many
that training period, 250 during that training period.
hours?
Um, but during that training period, you're going to acquire a whole bunch of certifications.
Oh
And
my
the
God.
goal would be to become either a commercial pilot that is employable to not in the perspective of an airline, because that's going to require between
Mhm.
1,000 and 1,500 hours. But
Wow.
there are many jobs that you can get to transition to being an airline pilot, and one of those jobs is a flight instructor. So you
Yeah.
can be required to have 250 hours as a flight instructor, or 250 hours before you can be a flight instructor, and then you're employable as a flight instructor pretty much immediately. And you
Okay.
would do that for 1 to 2 years,
Wow.
and you would make around $20 to $30 an hour while you're doing that. And I know that doesn't seem like much, but
Mm.
ultimately the goal is not to do that forever. Ultimately, the goal would be to get a better, higher level job.
Mhm.
Um, and then you'd be eligible once you met the requirements, you'd be eligible to apply and get hired for an airline.
So in essence, after you've worked or trained for a year, you're able to get a salary that can help offset the cost of some of the future training in essence.
Absolutely, yes. Yes,
Okay.
you can then have a job that allows you to build time while
Mm.
not continuing to be in debt or to
Oh,
go in debt. Yeah,
perfect. The we're almost done. And so instead of going through the list of questions, I feel like I need to bring you back for a part 2.
absolutely. I'm happy to do that. I am very happy to do that.
So
Um,
sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, did you want to know what the ultimate goal salary was? I saw that in the questions.
Yes.
So as you transition through the ranks, essentially, you're
Yeah.
going to be able to get a better and better pay. Entry level first officers make for their first year, entry level first officers make 60 to 90,000, maybe a little bit more, maybe 60 to 100,000 in their first year as a first officer. Second year first officer pay lays around 120 to 150. Um, and then you would just continue on that path until you were eligible for captain pay. Captain, once you're eligible, once you're qualified and you're ready to upgrade, often based on seniority, certainly skill, but based on how long have I been at the company. Pays for that start around 200 to 250,000 and up to probably around 400,000 a year.
Wow. Okay, that's a very pay scale right there.
It starts slow, but like I said, it's sort of like going to residency as a doctor and spending some time, and you really have to learn and internalize those skills, and eventually you can realize some quite profitable. But I do want to stress again, it is very technical and it can be exhausting. So this isn't free money. You are going to earn that.
Got it. In closing, is there any message based on initiatives with your airline across the industry for getting the underrepresented community into the aviation industry. Like, what are your thoughts, just in closing? And after you've done that, if you could just tell us again one more time how to get in touch with you. And I think that's about it for today. Go ahead.
No problem at all. And I'd be happy to come back for a part two if you need more information. So airlines currently have a very strong initiative to bring in underrepresented groups. That's minorities and women. Women represent just 8% of the pilot force in the United States. Women alone represent 8%, and minorities represent females represent just 2% or less. So there is an initiative to bring minorities and women into aviation. It is very strong. Airlines really do work very hard to do that. There are many opportunities for scholarships, etc., to bring in underrepresented groups. So that is a very strong initiative that the airlines are working very hard, because traditionally it has been dominated by white males. And so and it's something that I am quite dedicated to as well. So again, reaching out to me for that information is absolutely welcome. And again, my email is aluminum. So I know it's a little long, aluminumtubepodcast@gmail.com, and they can contact me there, or just go to the website and you can click on my contact information. It's altubepodcast.com or aluminumtubepodcast.com. So I'm happy to answer questions, and they can also email me questions and I can answer them live on my podcast, and I'm certainly happy to come back.
Are you also on LinkedIn?
I am not.
I looked for you, so okay, that's fine. Well, we have your contact information. Thank you so much for your time today. Like I said, I'll reach out for a part two because we didn't get through half of the questions.
Oh goodness, I know. I'm so sorry. I'm long-winded. The other one is you can actually look up aluminum tube @aluminum tube on Instagram. So you can contact me through Instagram @aluminum tube.
Okay, great.
But thank you so much. I appreciate you having me on, and I'm happy to come back. So thank you, Amalia.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.